Good evening, everyone. I am Shramana Biswas, and I welcome you all to this panel discussion on cultural identity and ideology, curated under TMYS review in association with Oxford University Press. Under this theme, TMYS review December 2020 will explore the role of artistic endeavors of society in shaping cultural identity and ideology. I would also like to say that we are calling for submissions of stories, essays, and poems. And for project architecture and submission guidelines, please visit www.tellmeyourstory.biz. Today's topic of discussion is motion pictures, regionalism, and the people. We are honored to have with us Dr. Rajeev Kamineni, Dr. Suman Ghosh, Dr. Akshaya Kumar, and Dr. Devnath Pathak had some emergency, and uh, we are lucky that he actually sent us a video of his talk, which we will play after a while. Uh, so yes, thank you all professors to be as that you have joined us as our esteemed speakers for the panel. Thank you so much. I shall now quickly introduce our speakers. Uh, Dr. Rajeev Kamineni started his working career as a bookstore in a bookstore almost 3 decades ago, and then moved into area sales manager, director, executive director, chief officer, lecturer, and head of program positions. He is a multiple award-winning lecturer with lecturing stints in Australia, South Africa, Singapore, Japan, India, and Dubai. Currently associate head of accreditation in Adelaide Business School and teaching management for University of Adelaide students, Dr. Kamineni held part-time and full-time positions at Bond University, Griffith University, University of Western Sydney, and University of South Australia. Dr. Kamineni is an active Rotarian for many years, is currently the president at Rotary Club of Adelaide, vice president of the Prospect District Cricket Club, and he was chair of University of Adelaide Theatre Guild. Apart from owning and operating businesses, Dr. Kamineni was actively involved in financing 35 movies and producing 14 movies in the Indian movie industry. With a lifelong passion for cinema, Dr. Kamineni has authored a book on Indian cinema published by Routledge, UK. He was also actively involved as an organizer and executive committee member of the Chennai International Film Festival, India. And he was a judge of the Global Undergraduate Dublin Awards in Music, Film and Theatre category. Is a judge for Australian Marketing Institute's Marketing Excellence Awards. PhD in Entrepreneurship, committed to the cause of cinema as art and commerce, setting up a business school, a book retail business, and leading the diversification of a media company into commercial sports, has equipped Dr. Kamineni with the ability and skills to mentor in the areas of entrepreneurship, media, arts and entertainment, retail, sports, and education. Dr. Kamineni won the Best Business Plan Award as part of a team representing Australia in the Moot Court World Business Plan competition held at Austin, USA. As a former bookseller, entrepreneur, and a movie producer, Dr. Kamineni is passionate about social enterprise and entertainment startup ventures, and he is a member of book clubs, arts, and social organizations in India and Australia. Dr. Suman Ghosh is subject leader, film and television at Bath University, UK. A film historian and commentator, Dr. Ghosh teaches in courses on American cinema, global film studies, and political film from mainstream, art house, and independent traditions. Dr. Ghosh has taught in universities across the UK and has been Erasmus Plus visiting faculty to Taras Shevchenko University, Ukraine in 2019, and Rusa visiting professor at Jadavpur University, India in 2020. Dr. Ghosh has published in mainstream platforms including The Conversation, The Independent, and the World Economic Forum. Dr. Akshaya Kumar received his PhD in film studies from the University of Glasgow before joining IIT Indore as an assistant professor. His work cuts across Indian cinema, comparative media studies, and platform capitalism. His essays have appeared in leading international journals including Social Text and Postmodern Culture. Dr. Kumar is also author of the recently published Provincializing Bollywood, Bhojpuri Cinema in a Comparative Media Crucible, published by Oxford University Press in 2021. Dr. Devnath Pathak is a founding faculty of sociology at South Asian University, New Delhi, and has previously taught at Hindu University, Jamia Millia Islamia. Um, he was a visiting scholar at Brown International Advanced Research Institute at Brown University, a Charles Wallace Fellow at Queen's University Belfast, a visiting scholar at Indian Institute of Advanced Studies Shimla, and scholar in residence in Indian Institute of Management Calcutta. He has authored the books In Defense of the Ordinary, Everyday Awakenings, published in 2021, and Living and Dying Meanings in Maithili Folklore in 2019, and in addition to many curatorial and edited books. He is also a founding editor of the popular public space on YouTube, Gulf Lok, which curates significant dialogues. Now, without further delay, we shall start with today's session. Dr. Rajeev Kamineni, I request you to please present your views on today's topic. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Shramana. Thanks for your wonderful introduction of all four of us. You've done a great job. It's the topic is very pertinent now because we keep hearing about the word pan India very often nowadays. Uh, and it really amuses me to hear this word pan India because when the content is good, it doesn't matter where it comes from, and it's not a regional content, it is a content which is universal. And it's not unique only to the Indian cinema. Even in the Hollywood cinema structure, they always used to classify movies which will work well in the Asian market, which will work well in the European market, which will work in the home market of North American market. But so it was always regionalized because the content was there is only a few movies which can always say that we are targeting a global audience, but they used to know which pockets it will work well. For example, James Bond movies typically work very well in Asia compared to the North American market. In fact, none of the James Bond movies are in the top 10 list of blockbusters in the North American market. Whereas if you go into the Asian market and the European market, you will see James Bond movies at a very high, in the top 10 or 15 category success stories. So when we say that regionalism is impacting motion pictures, regionalism will impact only if you're targeting niche markets. If you have content, I can give you a few examples like movies, which there was a movie in 1961 made in Tamil called Pasamalar, which means loving flower. That was so successful, it was made into every other language in India. And in Hindi, it was made as Raki with Ashok Kumar and Vaida Rahman. It was made in Telugu, it was made in Kannada, it was made in Malayalam. It was a story about a brother and sister. The concept was very universal. Look at another movie, Amitabh Bachchan's Dawn. Probably it was made in six other languages because it was successful, because the content was universal. And another fun, entertaining movie called Amar Akbar Anthony, which was supposedly a regional content, but it was made in every possible language in India because the content could attract people from different parts of the society and the country. And so, if we say it's regionalism is focusing on only certain regions, yes, because all the movie makers originate from those regions, whether it's from the Punjabi regions or whether from Rajasthan or whether from the heartland of India. That's where the movie makers came. So naturally, they will bring in their own narrative, their own stories, their own experiences and background when they start making movies. But by the time they got into the market, in the national market, whether the so-called Bollywood, which is centered around Bombay, they have to realize that they have to make movies which will work in five or six circuits for the movie to be successful. Otherwise, they'll end up in with a movie which is only working in one circuit, whether in Bombay or Delhi, and then it'll sink and the investment won't be recovered. So for them to recover investment, they have to make movies which will overcome all these regional trends. And regionalism is whether it's a stereotype making fun of people from certain regions, That was always a focus in cinema. Even if you go to Hollywood movies, they do have people with funny accents, funny languages, funny backgrounds, and it was always made fun. Before the political correctness started kicking in, it was regionalism was used for fun, for driving home a message, or also to try to show that we are trying to bring together different people from different parts of the world. So, my take on regionalism is, if the content is good, if the content is universal, it doesn't matter where it's coming from, it will be accepted across. If the content is very, very regional and focusing only on a particular region, then the market size is very small. And from a marketing angle, I think we are doing a disservice for making a movie which is focusing only on a very small segment of the market. So, regionalism can be used for the advantage and also can be disadvantages if it's not tapped into properly. That's my take on it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It was an excellent presentation, especially like what you said about regionalism and targeting a demography. Like I felt that you were talking about like a content uh, and translating that content across borders, and
Mhm.
that is how like I felt like that what you were talking about in your speech, and especially how you said that the regionalism is also at times it is used for making fun, and also the advantage is that the inclusiveness of regionalism, and maybe an attempt to add a certain exoticism also, like to like while we include other say people belonging from other cultures into a movie. So yes, sir,
Yes.
thank you very much
Thanks, Ramana. Thank you.
for that talk. Next we move on to Dr. Suman Ghosh. So please, we would like your views on the given topic.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for for creating these spaces where we can talk about a broad range of themes from very different points of view. And today, obviously, we're talking about regional cinemas and a pan-Indian cinema, the idea of a pan-Indian cinema. And I think I'd like to sort of take off from where Dr. Kamineni sort of ended, but because what he was saying has got me thinking. So I'll start with some of the threads of his ideas and then sort of take on uh, a slightly different turn towards what I was originally going to talk about, if that's okay. Now, the idea of regionalism, I think, is actually something which has always been a very important part of the kind of strength of Indian cinema. The strength of Indian cinema, i.e., for instance, it has allowed regional narratives to occupy broader spaces. A very good example is a film like Devdas. I can think of Devdas being made in the 1920s, and like the silent versions of the Devdas. Then there is obviously one of the pioneers of talkie cinema in Bengal and also in other parts of India, Pramotesh Bodua. And so there is his Devdas, and then there is the very famous Devdas which featured K.L. Saigal. And then and there are Devdas narratives made across a range of other filmmaking practices, other languages. There are Devdas adaptations, and then of course you have the very famous Dilip Kumar version that's made later on. There are adaptations of Devdas, including, for instance, Guru Dutt's Pyasa, and then of course you have uh, in Bengal you have other versions. You have a version starring Uttam Kumar, who is one of Bengal's very big stars, along with Soumitra Chattopadhyay, and Soumitra plays Devdas and Uttam Kumar plays Chuni Babu. And of course, towards the turn of the millennium, we had Shah Rukh Khan playing Devdas, and you suddenly realize that these narratives which emerge from one region then go on to become narratives which other people in other parts of India come to identify with on their own terms. So, in that sense, there is this kind of duality between regionalism and a pan Indian cinema, or the idea of a pan Indian cinema. But I sort of fully agree that fundamentally the idea of regionalism and the idea of regional cinema has always been a very important part of how Indian cinema has worked, and it has been one of its huge positives. There are directors who, of course, have tried to overcome regionalism. I think of somebody like Shotanjit Rai, who, for instance, long after he had made his sort of masterpieces in the 50s and the 60s, he went on to venture into a film like Shatranj Ki Khiladi, where he went purely with the purpose of not merely telling a particular story by Premchand, which he really liked, but for the opportunity of working with some stars from Mumbai, Bombay it was then, whose performance and whose acting ethic, whose entire approach he immensely admired. And that is how, it was Amjad Khan and Sanjeev Kumar. And later on, of course, he works with Om Puri and Smita Patil in Sadgati. And then I think of other directors like Mrinal Sen. And Mrinal Sen is obviously a marvelous director. But I think of a film like Oka Uri Katha. Oka Uri Katha is a film which he makes sort of uh, you know, far into the 1970s. But it is not a Bangla film. It is not a Bengali film. It's a Telugu film. And before that, Mrinal Sen makes Matiro Manisha, which is in Odia. So this is once again a director who is trying to overcome regional boundaries very consciously. That, I think, is one of the reasons why I would say that the regional cinema and the idea of a pan-Indian cinema, this kind of duality is one of the things which has actually been a huge strength of the Indian cinema. And no doubt there are plenty of other examples that we can think of. I can think of, for instance, somebody like Tarun Majumdar, who made the immensely successful Pathak in the 1960s in Bangla, and then went on to make a Hindi version, which was Rahagir, starring Biswajit, or Balika Badhu, which he made in Bangla, and then he made it in Hindi. It was very successful indeed. And Tapan Singh, who brought Ashok Kumar and Vaijayanti Mala to star in Hate Bajare, and Dilip Kumar and Saina Banu to work with him in Sagina Mahatma. Very successful ventures. So this play of regionalism and pan-Indian cinema has always been a very, very important part of it. But this basically sort of takes on to the other aspect of Bengal cinema that I wanted to talk about briefly. This is the year 2022. The most successful Bengali film this year, playing in the theaters, and many of you might be aware, some of you might even have watched it. It's a film called Aparajita. It is a film which is about the making of a film. That film is Pather Pachali. It is about the making of a film by a pioneering director. And it is a film about the making of a film about village life, something that a lot of writers don't really write about very much anymore. And it is about filmmakers making films on things that aren't made anymore. So in the sense, there is almost a kind of an appeal to the past. Now, somewhere, the idea that village life was the center of the nerve center, as it were, of the Indian way of life is actually something which is probably far less prominent in cinema than it used to be before. And I'm sort of fully bearing in mind the fact that you have some brilliant series like Panchayat being made, or some absolutely marvelous work. But in terms of the ways in which we think of the Indian way of life, the village life as a kind of center space is something which is far less present. Our thinking, our approaches to life are much more urban, and that is actually something which has changed. So in that sense, the fact that Aparajita is doing very well in the theaters is partly essentially because it is about a kind of nostalgia, about a life and a way of living which doesn't really exist anymore, right? Now, if you look at the contemporary box office, you suddenly realize that Bengal's regional cinema is, in a sense, out of step with the pan-Indian idea of a cinema. That doesn't make it any better or any worse. It is just that it is sort of out of step in a way that, for instance, the examples of Tarun Majumdar and Tapan Singh and Mrinal Sen and Rai that I was talking about don't apply anymore. Bengal's cinema, the main box office successes are about detective stories, about Feluda, Bomkesh, Kiriti, Kakababu, all of these detective stories, Mitin Washi. And they're all basically memorials to characters which were created by authors who are long dead for the most part, and stories from a different time. So in that sense, there is an element of nostalgia. And what I'm basically trying to say is that in this nostalgia and in this sense of looking at a very different kind of past, the idea of the common man or the common person, the idea of common people being absolutely at the center of a narrative in Bangla cinema is probably something which has taken a backstage. And I'm sort of fully aware of the fact that there's some brilliant films being made, Gautam Ghosh's Shankachil or Koshi Ganguly's Shabda, but they are films about protagonists. They're very good character studies. They're incredibly in-depth psychological studies. Some of them have won very major awards. They get screened very well. But somewhere there is this difference between the head and the heart. And in that space between the head and the heart, the intellect, the space of the intellect and the space of everyday life, and in that space, the heart once again needs to start winning. So those are basically my thoughts in terms of the ways in which regional cinema used to be a much more integral part of the Indian cinema question. In a way, it probably isn't anymore with Bengali cinema, at least. I cannot obviously speak for other regional cinemas, but this is a very clear change that seems to have taken place, and that's something that I thought that would be sort of worth mentioning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a very absorbing presentation, and I completely agree with what you said that how cinema is actually moving towards and targeting a global audience, moving towards even globalization, and how it is like not depicting village life, which you said that how it used to be the nerve center and also the center space of say a human uh, culture and civilization. Thank you so much, sir. We now move to our next speaker, Dr. Akshay Kumar. So please share your views with us.
Thank you, Shramana, for both the invitation and the introduction. So, to offer my thoughts on the subject, I'll invite you to think about Lagan, a film that came out in 2001, based in drought-stricken Champaner in Gujarat, where the film is inscribed as an Indian tale of colonial exploitation, a tale of villagers under colonial exploitation. Uh, Think about a film that comes just 2 years later, Sasura Bada Paisa Wala, a breakthrough Bhojpuri film, which is a remake of a Hindi film called Jamai Raja, came out in the 90s, which itself was a remake of a 1989 Telugu film. So here is a Bhojpuri film inscribed with overtones of regionalist assertion of subaltern masculinity. Uh, and so in a way, because of the centrality of geography and landscape, since it's a very arid landscape and you're talking about drought, Lagan could very well have been a Gujarati film, whereas Sasra Bada Paisa Wala, which is already a remake of a Telugu original, is as if it's rehearsing a Hindi film in Bhojpuri. So the question of where exactly does the regional locus of a certain imagination that's being offered by a film lies, it's always been fairly complicated. And at least in film studies, it refers to one of the finest essays written by a scholar, Stephen Hughes, who writes this essay titled "What is Tamil about Tamil cinema?" And he's referring to a very early period in Tamil cinema when people were asking these questions as to what exactly makes our film a representative of Tamil cinema. Is it the language? Is it the culture? Is it the personnel? Is it the themes? Because of course there is an element of crossover, cultural crossover, and then there is an element of universality. How do you negotiate or how do you separate that universality, which Rajeev was also talking about, from very hardcore cultural specificity, which is in some sense bound with the cultural expectations of the audience. So this is a terrain that's been complex and difficult to navigate for a very long time. The coupling of language and region is often used to inscribe new industrial strategies onto a familiar plank. So what I'm trying to say here is that while the identification of the region is a complex political process, regionalism in particular, in popular culture, is about finding a familiar as well as repeatable pattern as a plank on which regionalist assertions could be mounted. And this repeatability is essentially very important. You could look at the work of Madhav Prasad, the foremost scholar of Indian cinema, who has shown in his book Cinepolitics how similar techniques of political identification with the region and drawing star power from the domain of cinema into electoral politics was done successfully in the southern states, with at least two of which saw both N.T. Ramarao and N.G. Ramachandran convert their film stardom to political stardom. So by deploying certain codes of regionalist identification, they were able to traverse and ace the topmost brackets of performative sovereignty. In Bhojpuri cinema, after family melodramas with which the whole wave began, this familiar plank shifted towards an even broader open-ended form. That's action cinema, which was centrally predicated on action heroes and computer graphics. And this was heavily borrowing from what was going on in Hindi cinema, especially how Bhojpuri cinema changes radically after Dabang in particular, and the popularity of Dabang as an action film in the belt, which is the Bhojpuri-speaking belt. So, but otherwise, the direct lineage that Bhojpuri cinema usually draws is from the 1990s Hindi action cinema. So Lagan was a Hindi period drama at a time of great transition within the industry. The shift towards the multiplex economy was only beginning, but in a few years, this shift was complete, and in the most profitable segments of the industry. So here is a transition that takes place from a single screen exhibition-based film industry towards a multiplex-centric economy where most of the profits are coming from the multiplexes. And one of the things it does, it forces onto the economy is very significant rise in ticket pricing, which means that a lot of working class population is effectively ejected from the film industry's central audience base. And Bhojpuri cinema's regionalism was affected by this ejection of the vast majority of the working class audience, who were earlier the steadiest fan base of the Hindi film industry. So here is something to think about. I mean, this Bhojpuri film audience did not emerge all of a sudden. This used to be the Hindi film audience of a certain kind of Hindi film that ceases to exist beyond a certain point of time, around the late 90s and through the 2000s is the period during which this transition takes place. And Bhojpuri cinema's very naked, very clear assertion of regionalism comes out of it. But there is another kind of regionalism that came out of this same process, which was more subordinated to the Hindi film industry. For the first time in the Hindi film industry, they had to take cognizance of the various Hindis that hold together the illusion of one language spoken all the way between Rajasthan and the borders of Bengal. So this is the period starting roughly in 2003 with the coming of Hasil, which made almost overnight the Hindi film industry much more sensitive to regional tonalities of spoken Hindi. And then you had Omkara and Ishkia and Dabang and Pan Singh Tomar, through which this segment of the Hindi film industry became such a force within the erstwhile Urdu-inflected Hindi film industry that even Salman Khan had to dabble in some Haryanvi and Sultan. So there's a whole spectrum that really shifts between 2003 and 2016. So the region came to the fore, and along with it did people as speakers of far more colorful languages. If you were watching Son Chidiya, this 2018 film, in a theater, for a vast majority of Hindi film speakers, it was educational about the variations within the tray, the region that they imagined being represented in the Hindi cinema prior to it. But of course, Hindi cinema's affiliations to the Hindi-speaking region have always been tenuous and never quite regionalist. The regional cachet of Hindi cinema has generally been built via abstractions and lose consolidation. Since the multiplex economy began to gravitate much more towards a few metropolitan centers, there was little incentive to hold on to those abstractions, and the disintegration of this Hindi film consolidation over the early 2000s and the easier access to digital cameras then gave birth to many different regionalist codings of the people. Bhojpuri, Haryanvi, Santhali, Garhwali, Ladakhi, all these film industries sort of came out of that transition. So what I'm effectively trying to say is that when you're looking at region and popular culture, there are various codings that appear to be stable at a certain point of time in certain film industries, and then all of a sudden, due to primarily distribution exhibition strategies as opposed to production strategies, these scenarios can change radically, and all of a sudden you have these interesting cultural breakthroughs which lead to new industrial patterns. And that's how I roughly understand the codings of region and the people in popular culture. The fact of the matter may yet be that it's not very stable. It remains in transition. So if at all you want to study this at any particular point of time, you really have to go back and draw the cultural thematic lineages, as well as look at the film economy and the markets and how they've changed to make sense of what exactly is going on at this particular point of time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a very engrossing presentation, and thank you so much for speaking about the Bhojpuri film industry, because it is not like dominantly spoken about. And I especially liked how you drew a parallelism with the Hindi film industry, especially what you said, that it actually drew on the illusion of one language, because as we know that vernacular languages in India, they definitely share like not only a history, but they have also borrowed languages from one another. Uh, so yes, this sensitization is definitely very important. Thank you so much, sir. Now we would play Dr. Devnath Pathak's video that he has shared with us. Uh, I think that we have some connectivity issues. Maybe we can play his video at the end of the session. So I think we shall proceed with the Q&A session. My first question is to Dr. Rajeev Kamineni. Uh, so, some academics believe that narration is used to assimilate knowledge, while others believe that it may elicit sensation. So, how can we adequately perceive this narrative of a movie as a set of expressions?
That's a interesting question, Shramana. When you sent it to me, I thought it's a narrative means we are in the okay. There are different streams of movies. One, we can say it's in India. We can typically classify them as commercial and art house cinema. Anywhere in the world, it means India. I don't want to specifically say India. Anywhere in the world, there is art house cinema which has a different narrative compared to a commercial cinema. And in fact, even the other day, I was talking to someone representing the government over here in South Australia, and they were saying that the mandate for them is to make movies which talks about the indigenous people over here. So if that is the mandate, commercial aspect doesn't come into the fore. Means we have to make movies which is fulfilling that mandate. But to come back to a point of narration, if at the end of the day I'm going to a movie for 2.5 hours or 1.5 hour to be entertained, If I'm going there to be lectured or preached about something, probably I don't want to go into the movie theater. So that takes into the account the narrative. So it's when you say sensation, it can be anything. Sensation can be positive also. We like to be we like to come back feeling relaxed and happy because we watched a good movie, a happy movie, a funny movie, or we want to have the emotion of patriotism or beating up the bad guys or superhuman effort. Means if you look at all the Marvel movies, they're all superheroes. They're trying to create a sensation that eventually good will win over bad. Even if the bad is much stronger, much powerful, the good superhero will always win. So that's the narration. So at the end of the day, we are trying to entertain. So in entertainment, the narrative is very clear that you can have a message, but the bottom line is to entertain the audience. And when you're entertaining the audience, obviously you cater to some sensations, some senses, not at least one or two of the senses. You're trying to cater to that. And when you're trying to cater to the senses, you have to tank think a little bit with the storyline or the way it's narrated, so that you have emphasis on that. And the classic example in Indian cinema is songs and dances. Means in real life we don't just break into a song and dance when we feel happy, right? So it's not reality, but audience expects that. And especially if you classify the movie centers in India to A, B, and C, the distributors always tell me that this movie will run only in A center, this will not run in B and C center. So for the sake, even when we made very taut commercial thrillers, we had to insert a song into the movie because the distributors say, oh, if it's so tight and it's packaged for 1.5 hours, the how do we have an interval? We need to sell our stuff in the interval and the audience will walk away. So we have to put a song and drag it to 2 hours. So that's a narrative. So narrative based on entertainment, narrative based on commercial requirements, and narrative based on the conviction of the maker. So these are the factors which influence the narrative. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answer, sir. If we look at like movies and films are definitely art in itself, and uh, this is a debate that Horace has started uh, long back. Like, what should be the role of art? Whether it should be to instruct or to delight or both. So, thank you so much, sir, for answering. We would once again try to play Dr. Devnath's Pathak video. So, yes.
If one has to trace the lineage of documentary films, documentary filmmaking, probably one would go back to the same silent era cinema time in India, and even later, when attempts to generate footage of political mobilization, the speeches delivered by the then leadership, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, and a plenty on Mahatma Gandhi. Those video documentations represented at a very factual level as to how Indian National Congress was generating its support base and the dissemination of the Congress ideals during the freedom movement. One can say that it was at the most rudimentary level that one gets to see the documentary footages. They were primarily in the form of raw footages, which were also used in some of the early Hindi cinema. And because of the usage of those footages in some of the Hindi films, for example, one can remember a film like Mahatma Vidur, which was entirely modeled upon Mahatma Gandhi, though the character was named Vidur. Much later on, there were films in which the documentary footage of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel delivering a rousing speech to the masses. These footages were used in some of the feature films too. So one can say it was at that rudimentary level that, and a tryst with documentary filmmaking, particularly in the context of India, begins. But then the kind of documentary filmmaking that we are more familiar with today, and social science students particularly, they take interest in good variety of documentary films. If we look at them, we realize that there has been a preoccupation with certain kind of social science ideas behind documentary films. One very important idea is of correspondence. It's related to a kind of theoretical understanding that truth always has correspondence with the things out there. It's a correspondence theory of truth, that what you see in a documentary film has correspondence with reality, and therefore documentary films are much closer to truth than its counterpart in entertainment industry. Other formats may not have the similar kind of truth claim which most of the documentary films would like to boast of. Now, the point is that every medium also has its own language. Uh, the visuality of this medium demands certain kind of creative uh, uh, balancing between fact and fiction. This goes with the technology. No technology is value neutral. Uh, uh, Same applies to cinematography. Same applies to the larger ensemble of technology that is employed in cinema making, be it documentary or otherwise. Particularly with regard to documentary films, one can safely assume that even though there is at face there is greater deal of truth claim, uh, there would be, however, certain kind of negotiations, creative negotiations with facts and fiction. There would be a design of the filmmaker that would be employed even in a documentary film. In spite of the fact that it has representation of the objects out there, it has certain kind of correspondence with things out there, realities out there. In spite of that, one cannot deny the possibility that a filmmaker would employ his or her vision in the making of that documentary film. With this idea of correspondence theory of truth, there has been also a great deal of emphasis on a particular variety of documentary films, which is known as ethnographic cinema, ethnographic films, very popular with students of sociology and anthropology. And in that context, it becomes necessary to ask a fundamental question as to what do we want to do with documentary films when it comes to the idea of ethnography. Can an anthropologist's ethnography be entirely replicated in a ethnographic documentary film? These kind of questions arise. A lot of artists, visual artists, have suggested later on that there can be an ethnographic methodology employed by artists. And from speaking from anthropological perspective, one would suggest that the ethnographic perspective employed by an artist need not be same as the ethnographic perspective which would emerge because of an anthropologist / an ethnographer's immersive understanding of the field or the place or the people. So suggesting that ethnographic film is the real kind of documentary film, that too is a little bit of far-fetched idea. Here the basic understanding shall be, as it ought to be, is that film, a kind of visual medium, would come with its own set of conditions, would come with its own kind of expectations, would come with certain kind of rationality attached with it. And when one is trying to employ this medium, one has to abide by that rationality. No matter how creatively we take liberty with that rationality, we cannot dismiss that rationality when we employ this medium. And hence, probably one has to suggest that there would be certain kind of ifs and buts associated with the idea of correspondence theory of truth as far as documentary films are concerned. This, however, does not mean that those who are into making documentary films do not play with variety of possibilities which arise from vernacular contexts, variety of possibilities in terms of employing idioms, narratives, metaphors, and variety of cultural tools which could add novel values or context sensitive values to a documentary, to a work of documentary film. That possibility cannot be denied. However, that also does not mean that it would become a perfect propaganda tool at any point of time. On one hand, we might have enjoyed watching various kind of documentary films. We have also been, with a great number of documentary films, we have been also at odd with them, precisely because of their pretentious presentations, because of this sense that we are dealing with truth, and therefore we need to be boring, and therefore we need to be slow, and therefore we need to be so-called in such manner purely factual. These things, these kind of orchestrations may be helpful in catering to a niche audience with your documentary film, but then it does not really serve the purpose of the purpose with which this medium comes into effect. So this will be a very modest kind of proposition that I would like to make when I'm thinking of documentary films. Thank you.
I think that we can all agree that it was a very captivating presentation by Dr. Devnath Pathak, and his main presentation was he was talking about documentary filmmaking as a method of inquiry, and I like the way he ended his presentation by talking about the pretentious sense that documentary filmmakers have, and portraying a kind of intellectual elitism, say through a documentary filmmaking. So yes, I we shall. Continue with the Q&A session. Dr. Kamineni, I have a second question for you. So, uh, how do movies appreciate and honor the struggles and aspirations of its starring men? Does it reflect the persistent sensibilities about the traits and characteristics seen as establishing masculinity?
That's a good question, Shramana, because in India, I think in especially any movie, again, I don't want to generalize and specify Indian movie industry. Even in Hollywood, when for many years we had heroes or leading artists who were very well dressed, very well groomed. And if you look at James Bond, he always, even in the middle of a fight sequence, he always used to have a tuxedo and look very good. Whereas that changed in the 80s, 90s when heroes like Bruce Willis came in, and the image of the hero changed. They were using the S words and the F words more regularly than normal English. And the perception of a hero and the language changed. Same time in India, when we had heroes like Mr. Dilip Kumar or Devanand, those they had a different personality compared to the 80s when Salim Javed created the concept of an angry young man. And the angry young man was reflecting the society or going against the norms and traditions of the society, so that he can take on the society and do a reform, or in the end achieve good versus bad, or the triumph of the good versus bad. But if you look at the example, the word which you used is masculinity. That's a very there was a researcher called Gert Hofstede who used it extensively to describe national cultures. He described certain cultures as masculine, certain as feminine. It doesn't mean that males dominate or females dominate. He expressed that the traits of masculinity, which is aggressiveness, unilateral decision making, as opposed to feminism, which is taking into account everyone and trying to have the softer side of decision making, which typically Asian countries tend to have, whereas masculinity was associated mostly with the European nations. And if you and there's a lot of research to show that the first four female prime ministers or leaders in the world, whether it's Golda Meir, Sirmao Bandaranaike, Indira Gandhi, and Margaret Thatcher, all of them acted more aggressively than normal men would do. They were more aggressive as prime ministers. And even today, if you look at movies which are supposedly female centric, they have titles like Mardani, which means that it's again manhood or masculinity for a female centric role. So the concept of masculinity has undergone radical change, drastic change, and it doesn't need to showcase it in such a way that we are showing the aggressiveness. The days of angry young men have changed now, and for all of 90s we had the romantic young man, the young man, and now again we've come back to the strong superhero young man, which is a different concept now. So the struggles of the heroes remain the same, but the way it is depicted has changed because in tune with the society. So I don't completely agree with the concept that masculinity is something which is depicted on the screen. It is something which can be subtly exploited. And if you look at the movies of Mr. Satyajit Ray, there's no aggressive masculinity over there, but there are problems. So if you look at a movie called Grapes of Wrath, which is a classic Hollywood movie, again there's the question of masculinity in terms of struggle, but it doesn't need to be aggressiveness. So that's my take on it.
Thank you so much, sir. Uh, Now we would move on to our next speaker, Dr. Suman Ghosh. Sir, my first question to you is that minority groups have been neglected, devalued, denigrated, and misrepresented in mainstream media. How can viewers' perceptions of individuals from different cultures get shaped by the stereotypical media content?
There are two things about this, really. I'm reminded, for instance, of a film like Peeply Live. You remember Peeply Live, made 2010, I think, right? And Peeply Live is one of these films which actually talks about the ways in which there is a stereotyping of marginalized communities, and this is a stereotyping which takes place partly because of the ways in which the media responds to a particular situation, right? And how it shapes the ways in which the audience perceives that situation. And to a certain extent, it almost becomes a story of urban India's reception of what goes on in rural India, right? There are these sort of generalizations, these huge generalizations. And that is where I think that there is a problem, which goes back to my sort of earlier point about the common person, common people. Who is the common people, right? Who are the marginalized communities? We are marginalized communities in various senses, depending on where we are. For instance, if you are from a particular part of the country, but you are working and living in a different part of the country, to a certain extent, you are a minority in that part of the country. What kind of minority? You are a linguistic minority. Similarly, you can be a religious minority. There are different ways in which people are minorities, right? Now, minorities are always at the margins in terms of the kind of mainstream narrative, right? If you are, for instance, and that's one of the reasons I'm not sort of not naming particular parts, because it's not about particular parts. If you are sort of in Bengal, or if you are in Gujarat, or if you are in Maharashtra, or if you are in Tamil Nadu, and you're originally from a different part of the country, and linguistically you have adapted and you have sort of made your life there, and that is your home. Maybe you have even had family there. The idea of the minority is actually something which operates at several levels. You can be minority in urban India, you can be minority in rural India, but at every level, the minority is a marginalized class, right? Denigrated? Sometimes. But put out of the mainstream picture? Yes, almost always. That is something that happens. And that is partly because, and this sort of goes back to what cinema is about. If cinema is for entertainment, and I don't want to be preached at, and I will not buy a ticket at something which preaches at me, then of course it becomes a very clear choice for producers, directors, and distributors in terms of what kind of content they make. They will make content which is about mainstream, and in that kind of content, it is easy to stereotype minorities because that is the easy way out. If, on the other hand, we want to make sure that we want an an understanding of the different cultures, including mainstream cultures and minority cultures across different parts of the country, then some of that responsibility will have to come from the industry itself in terms of the ways in which it makes films. But the other part of that, responsibility is not one-way traffic. The other part of it is that the audience too must want to know. The audience too must want to be interested. They need to know whether they can get entertained by things other than the standard thriller format. Are they entertained by other stories? Are they really curious about other people? It is fundamentally about both things, and it is only when both sides of the equation are balanced that we will actually have that kind of change. Without that, there will be a certain amount of there is a certain amount of marginalization, and it's very difficult to see a way out of it. That's basically what I'm saying.
Thank you so much, sir, for answering to the question, and also talking about this issue that how consumers generally influence the kind of films that are produced. And so my next question to you is that we have seen examples of both heroic and non-heroic personalities combined through time to time. To take on features from one another. So are heroes constantly changing entities?
You have asked a question, and when I listen to your question, I'm suddenly confronted by the timelessness of this question. In the Indian context, this timelessness is basically something which goes back to the Ramayana. It goes back to that conversation at the beginning of the Ramayana when Valmiki and Narada are having this conversation. And Valmiki asks Narada, who is this individual who in our times has the greatest qualities, who is valorous, brave, Kodvasmin sampratam loke, gunavan kascha viryavan, who is righteous in a religious way, who is full of gratitude, dharmagyascha, kratagyascha, satyavakyo, dridhavrata. So who is a hero? That is actually an age-old question. A hero is not somebody who wins in battle. A hero is somebody who overcomes a set of hurdles given a difficult situation that he or she finds themselves in. So in that sense, heroes are actually made out of situations. So to come back to your question, it is about a particular set of qualities or a particular set of characteristics. Those who have those characteristics will find themselves, if they didn't face those challenges, then they may not have found it necessary to be heroic. But when they are confronted, if Rama, for instance, had not been banished, and if he had not gone through the kinds of challenges, then he would not have had to display the kind of valorous bits. He could have continued like a really good king with, taking care of his subjects, like many kings before or after. It is only a particular situation or a particular set of challenges which actually brings out the ability of the individual to confront those challenges and rise to those challenges and rise above them. So in that sense, I don't think we think in terms of heroic or non-heroic individuals as being different things. The same individual can become very heroic given the situation that he or she is about to face. So that would be my response to you. But yes, it is a very age-old question.
Thank you, sir, for letting us know that heroes are actually products of the situation. So my next question to you is that, oh, so sorry, sir. Actually, I've
Thank you.
already asked two questions here. So
Yes, you
sorry.
have answered to the questions that you wanted to, but yes, please.
Yes. Yes. So my next set of questions is to Dr. Akshaya Kumar. So my first question is that, genre is crucial to the characterization, exploration, and identification of films. How are genre identities used? How elements make up genre and how they alter?
Okay, so as I was saying earlier, genres are about repeatability. I mean, essentially, we're talking about a contract between the film industry and its audience base in terms of first building a set of habits and expectations, and then departing from them bit by bit once in a while. So, the fundamental principle of genre theory, in a sense, is repetition and difference. It's about educating your viewers with a certain grammar, a certain giving them certain motifs of legibility through which genres can be identified, whether it's a crime film, a caper, a comedy, all have had, and of course, these motifs have changed over a period of time, but they've had for a very long time steady motifs. So the viewers have been educated in a certain kind of grammar through which they identify the genres of the film, around which the film is marketed, around which the posters are designed, around which trailers are cut. So, of course, a film can have and often has many more elements than the ones that are identified and amplified in trailers. Those strategies are designed around genre success, genres delivery of certain anticipated motifs that people have been habituated to. So it's a kind of contract that works between the people and the industry, and then of course there is also genre mixing. So it's not to say that genres are these fixed constructs that stay stable for a very long time, and internally there's no change. There's of course a lot of minor variation, and then there are major breakthroughs where you have genres really completely changing, or major genre bending interventions. We've seen a lot of you could take a film like Dangal and think about, oh, so this is a biopic or a sports biopic, which has been in fashion lately, sports biopics in particular. And then it's been given a feminist touch, especially in its marketing. So this is about projecting female wrestlers as opposed to male wrestlers. So there are so this is not just about genre conventions, but also about marketing strategies, about pitching a film in a certain way. So genres also provide those avenues. You can layer different strategies within its promotion. So genres, I mean, that's how I see them in terms of contract between the people and the industry.
Thank you, sir. And what you said about genre mixing, that is the commingling of various genre, like especially in Bollywood, that is how like Bollywood is known as masala movie because it has like so many genres in it. So my next question to you is that, the American dream is a crucial element of American society and identity as it is frequently explored in popular culture. Nevertheless, in the backdrop of a terrible economic crisis and domestic political and social strife, the American dream is regarded with rising skepticism. How does the American dream, as it is currently portrayed in movies, reflect and address this unprecedented historical era where the dream is fading?
Yeah, so Shramana, I think this is a far more complex question than what can be handled in the next few minutes, because we are in a sense dealing with the entire history of American cinema and the entire 20th century. This is about global economic history. This is about international politics. This is about a lot of things. But if I have to sum it up in one line, I would say that, in a sense, the American dream was an advertising tactic that has run its course. It has done what it was supposed to do. I mean, it was a certain kind of, if you want to look at the historical forces that constitute it, you'll have to look at the interwar period, the emergence of America, the transfer of power, transatlantic transfer of power from the colonial power that Britain was, and then the power that United States became in the post-war period. The fact that it was surplus economy, it was feeding most of the Europe, it was running the Marshall Plan, and Hollywood was an essential element of that soft propaganda, which it was doing all over the world. And American Dream was one of the key tenets of that propaganda. They wanted to tell you that this is the center of the free world. This is where we have these highways and cheap gasoline, and you can basically run around the country and you can freely communicate, as opposed to our rival forces in basically the Soviet world. So this was an anti-communist propaganda. Various scholars have written about it. More recently, Arvind Rajagopal talks about communicationism being the central principle of American ideology. The fact that they were saying that free communication is what defines the American people. We all know how well that American dream worked out for the Native Americans, or for the people who are now known as the flyover country inhabitants, people who live between the two coasts, for whom there is no America. So this is actually, it was more like a recruitment strategy for the elites of the world who were brought to the US. The American dream was being sold to them. Now, having said that, just think of Indian popular cinema as a maybe a bulwark against this. Hollywood was unable to make any significant breakthrough in the Indian market till as late as maybe 10 years ago. And so it was not because Indian cinema was so strong and we had such a strong fan base. It was more about the kind of films and the kind of strategies that the American dream was pushing into the other third world markets, and how it was not workable everywhere. The breakthrough was actually made with special effects, with computer graphics. I mean, it's through the Marvel Comics like films that we've finally broken the barrier, and now Hollywood is very much a very central part of at least the multiplex economy. It may not have much purchase in the rest of the Indian film market, but at least in 3-4 big metropolitan centers, through these CGI films and these characters who have no reference in reality, Hollywood have actually broken through. And in India, we are actually now making similar mythically scaled, utterly stupid, monumental films based in computer graphics, of course, and they have enormous popularity within as well. So there is a breakthrough now. This is not the breakthrough of American Dream. At the heart of these superhero films, there is a dystopia. There is dissatisfaction, and the history really changes with the 2008 crisis and the emergence, and Obama becoming the doormat for the Wall Street and basically letting them run the entire American economy and abandoning all the American people, and that completely changes the world. So there is surplus capital. Surplus capital makes these superhero films, and superhero films are dumped in the third world markets, and then we start aping them. That's how I see it. American Dream is irrelevant now. The buyers of American Dream are already sitting in the United States mostly, and the rest of them have a freeway between Delhi and New York, so they can go.
Thank you, sir. I'd actually never thought of this entire notion of American Dream as a dystopia. So thank you for bringing a fresh perspective to my thinking. So with this, we now come to the end of today's session. I would once again like to say that we are calling for submissions of stories, essays and poems, and for project architecture and submission guidelines. Please visit www.tellmeyourstory.biz. I extend a heartfelt thank you to Dr. Rajeev Kamineni, Dr. Suman Ghosh, and Dr. Akshaya Kumar. And I would also like to thank Dr. Nath Pathak for sending us his video. thank you for this wonderful and remarkable session. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, Shramana. Thank you, Akshaya. Thank you, Suman.
Thank you, Rajeev.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rajeev. Thank you, Akshaya.